the gods they erased from Scripture. What if every story in the Bible is actually a corrupted retelling of ancient African spiritual traditions that were deliberately altered to hide the most revolutionary truth in human history, that the original gods were African, and they're still here? In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd discovered caves near the Dead Sea containing scrolls that would shake Christianity to its foundations. But what the public was never told is that among those scrolls were texts that explicitly name and describe African deities who were systematically removed from biblical narratives. During the canonization process, these weren't just references, they were detailed accounts of African gods who actively participated in biblical events. Dr. Hugh Schonfield, the Jewish scholar who worked on the original Dead Sea Scroll translations before being mysteriously excluded from the project, kept secret notes about what he called the African suppression. His private journals, obtained by his family after his death in 1988, revealed that early biblical texts contained extensive descriptions of African spiritual beings who were later rewritten as angels, demons, or eliminated entirely. The scrolls prove beyond doubt that the Hebrew Scriptures originally acknowledged multiple African deities as active participants in human affairs. Dr. Schonfield wrote in his encrypted diary, "The monotheistic revision was a deliberate falsification designed to hide humanity's authentic spiritual history, but the evidence goes far deeper than the Dead Sea Scrolls. Ancient Coptic manuscripts preserved in Ethiopian monasteries contain versions of biblical stories that include named African gods, performing the same roles later attributed to the single Hebrew deity. These texts weren't influenced by biblical tradition. They preserve older versions of the same stories that show the original African spiritual context." The story of Moses parting the Red Sea, according to Ethiopian texts, involved direct intervention by Apedimак, the African lion-headed god of war and protection. The plagues of Egypt were orchestrated by Sebiumeka, the African deity of divine judgment. Even the burning bush was a manifestation of Arens Nufis, the African god of divine communication. These names appear in hieroglyphic records that predate Hebrew Scripture by thousands of years. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop's archaeological research proved that ancient Egyptian civilization was fundamentally African, not Middle Eastern. The gods that Egyptians worshipped for over 3,000 years, Amun-Ra, Isis, Horus, Thoth, were African deities whose influence extended throughout the ancient world. But here's the explosive revelation: these same African gods appear in disguised form throughout biblical narratives. The Hebrew El Elyon is a direct linguistic corruption of the African Amun-Ra. Ancient tablets discovered in Nubia show that El, the E, primary name for God in early Hebrew texts, derives from African root words meaning divine power. From the south, Yahweh himself has African origins that biblical scholars have desperately tried to hide. The name Yahweh appears in Egyptian texts as Yahu, referring to an African deity worshipped in Nubian temples over 4,000 years ago. Archaeological excavations at Elephantine Island uncovered temple inscriptions showing that Jewish communities in ancient Egypt worshipped Yahweh alongside his African consort goddess Asherah. The Bible didn't just hide individual African gods, it erased an entire pantheon. Ancient African spiritual systems recognized multiple aspects of cosmic intelligence, each governing different aspects of reality. There was Ptah, the African god of creation and technology; Thoth, the African god of wisdom and writing; Sekhmet, the African goddess of healing and divine justice; Sobek, the African god of fertility and protection. Every single one of these deities was either merged into the Hebrew monotheistic conception or demonized as false gods that had to be rejected. But the suppression wasn't just theological, it was political. The Roman Empire needed a unified religious system that could control diverse populations across 3 continents. Multiple African gods, with their emphasis on direct spiritual communication and individual divine connection, threatened the centralized authority that Rome required. Emperor Constantine's Council of Nicaea in 325 CE wasn't just deciding Christian doctrine, it was completing the erasure of African spiritual traditions that had already begun centuries earlier. The Council Fathers had access to hundreds of manuscripts that described African deities interacting with biblical figures, but these texts were deliberately excluded from the biblical canon and ordered destroyed. What survived as the Bible is a carefully edited version, designed to hide African spiritual influence, but they couldn't destroy everything. Hidden references to African gods remain embedded throughout biblical texts for those who know how to recognize them. The angel of the Lord, who appears repeatedly in the Old Testament, carries names and attributes that directly match African deities described in Nubian and Ethiopian sources. The cherubim described in Ezekiel's visions are precise descriptions of African sphinx-like beings worshipped in Kushite temples. Ancient African art depicts identical creatures with the same symbolic meanings that appear in biblical visions. These weren't borrowed from African sources. The biblical descriptions are African spiritual traditions that were incompletely disguised during the editing process. The evidence is overwhelming once you know how to look for it. Biblical place names consistently derive from African linguistic roots. Jerusalem comes from African words meaning city of peace. Bethlehem derives from African terms for house of bread. Even Israel has African etymological origins meaning people of the divine light. The genealogies prove African connections that couldn't be completely hidden. Abraham's wife, Keturah, is explicitly described as Cushite, African. Moses married an Ethiopian woman. The Queen of Sheba, who visited Solomon, was Ethiopian royalty. The biblical patriarchs weren't just connected to Africa, they were part of African spiritual lineages. But the most explosive evidence involves prophecies that specifically predict the restoration of African spiritual traditions. Isaiah 18 speaks directly about Ethiopia's role in the last days. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea. All ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains. This isn't metaphorical language, it's a specific prophecy about Ethiopian spiritual awakening affecting the entire world. Psalm 68:31 states, Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. This prophecy is being fulfilled right now as African spiritual traditions experience global revival. Zephaniah 3:10 predicts, From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. The scattered African peoples worldwide are rediscovering their spiritual heritage and reclaiming their role as humanity's spiritual guides, but the religious establishment is fighting desperately to maintain the suppression. Archaeological expeditions to African sites that might reveal pre-biblical spiritual traditions are consistently denied permits or have their findings classified. Ancient manuscripts that show African spiritual influence on biblical texts are locked in private collections or Vatican archives where scholars cannot access them. Seminary education deliberately excludes courses on African contributions to biblical tradition. Pastors and priests are never taught that the spiritual beings they call angels were originally African gods, or that the prayers they recite contain invocations to African deities whose names were linguistically disguised. The systematic deception has lasted over 1,600 years, but it's finally breaking down. Modern DNA analysis proves that biblical populations had significant African genetic markers. Archaeological discoveries consistently show African cultural influences in biblical era sites. Linguistic research demonstrates that Hebrew and Aramaic contain extensive African vocabulary that was previously unrecognized. Most importantly, African spiritual communities worldwide are experiencing direct communication with the same deities that were hidden in biblical texts. Practitioners of traditional African religions report contact with spiritual beings who identify themselves by names that appear in disguised form throughout biblical narratives. These beings are revealing that they never left. They were simply renamed and their stories altered to serve political purposes. They're ready to restore their authentic relationships with humanity. The revival of African spiritual traditions isn't just cultural renaissance. It's the return of humanity's original spiritual guides who were forced into hiding by imperial religious systems. The gods who were erased from Scripture are reclaiming their rightful place as guides for human spiritual evolution, but their return threatens to expose the entire foundation of organized religion as a spiritual fraud built on stolen African traditions. The question isn't whether these gods will return. They're already here. The question is, what happens when humanity realizes that everything they've been taught about biblical spirituality is a carefully constructed lie designed to hide our true spiritual heritage? Hidden in plain sight throughout your Bible are the original names of African gods, deliberately disguised through centuries of linguistic manipulation, so subtle that even Hebrew scholars have missed the most explosive evidence of spiritual theft in human history. In 1902, German archaeologist Friedrich Zucker discovered something in the ruins of ancient Meroe that would revolutionize biblical scholarship, if anyone had been allowed to publish his findings. Carved into temple walls that predated Hebrew, Scripture by over 2,000 years, were the exact names that appear in biblical texts, but in their original African forms, with their authentic spiritual meanings intact. Zucker's findings were immediately classified by the German Archaeological Institute, and he was forced to sign confidentiality agreements that lasted until his death. But Zucker kept secret photographs and notes that his grandson donated to the Sudanese National Museum in 1987. These documents prove that what Jews and Christians call the sacred names of God are actually corrupted pronunciations of ancient African divine titles that were stolen, mispronounced, and stripped of their original spiritual power. The most explosive discovery involves the name Yahweh itself. Ancient Kushite temple inscriptions show that Yahweh is a Hebrew mispronunciation of Yahweh, the original African name for the solar deity worshipped throughout Nubia for over 4,000 years. The Hebrew scribes who encountered this name during their time in Egypt and Ethiopia couldn't pronounce it correctly and created a linguistic corruption that became the foundation of Jewish monotheism. But Yahweh wasn't the only God. He was part of an African pantheon that included his divine family. The original African spiritual system recognized Yahweh as the husband of Asherah, the great mother goddess whose worship extended throughout ancient Africa. Hebrew texts contain over 40 references to Asherah, but they're translated as groves or sacred poles to hide the fact that early Hebrews worshipped Yahweh's African wife alongside him. Dr. William Dever's archaeological work at Tel El Farah uncovered Hebrew inscriptions that explicitly name Yahweh and his Asherah, proving that Jewish monotheism is a later theological invention that covered up the original African polytheistic system. Every major biblical name derives from African spiritual terminology. Ishel, the primary Hebrew word for God, comes from the African El-Am, meaning the hidden power. Ancient Nubian texts describe El-Am as the invisible force that animates all African deities. The cosmic consciousness that Hebrew theology later claimed was a separate, jealous God who demanded exclusive worship. Elohim, the plural form used throughout Genesis, preserves evidence of the original African pantheon. The Hebrew text literally says, "The gods created heaven and earth," but Christian and Jewish translators render it as singular God to hide the polytheistic origins. The original African Elohim referred to the council of cosmic intelligences who collectively govern universal creation. Ancient Ethiopian manuscripts preserve the names of this divine council: El-Am, hidden power; Baal, the manifest Lord; Astar, star wisdom; Ta-El, creative speech; Thothim, divine mathematics; and Ra-El, solar consciousness. Every single one of these names appears in disguised form throughout biblical texts. Baal became the false god that Hebrews were commanded to reject. But ancient African texts show that Baal was simply another name for the same cosmic force that Hebrews called Yahweh. The biblical conflict between Yahweh and Baal is actually a theological fabrication designed to hide the fact that they were originally the same African deity. Michael the archangel derives from the African Mikael, meaning "who is like the hidden power." Ancient Kushite warrior priests carried this title when they served as earthly representatives of cosmic consciousness. The biblical Archangel Michael is actually a Hebrew memory of African spiritual warriors who demonstrated divine capabilities in battle. Gabriel comes from the African Gaber-El, meaning strength of the hidden power. Ethiopian manuscripts describe Gaber-El as the African deity responsible for divine communication and prophetic revelation, exactly the roles attributed to the biblical Gabriel. The angel who announced Jesus' birth was originally an African god of divine messages. Raphael derives from Raphael, the African healer of hidden power. Ancient Nubian medical texts invoke Raphael as the primary deity governing spiritual healing and restoration. The biblical association with healing preserves the original African understanding, but removes the context that made the healing power accessible to human practitioners. But the name theft goes even deeper into New Testament texts. Jesus is a Greek corruption of the Hebrew Yeshua, which itself derives from the African Yeshua, meaning Yah saves. But in original African usage, this wasn't the name of one historical person. It was a title used by any spiritual teacher who demonstrated divine capabilities. Ancient Ethiopian church manuscripts contain accounts of multiple individuals, called Yeshua, who performed the same miracles attributed to the biblical Jesus. The Gospel stories are composite narratives that combine the biographies of several African spiritual masters into one fictional character. Christ comes from the Greek Christos, but this derives from the African Christos, meaning anointed with cosmic consciousness. African initiation ceremonies involved literal anointing with sacred oils that contained consciousness-enhancing substances. Individuals who successfully completed these initiations became Christos, beings who had achieved permanent union with cosmic intelligence. The title wasn't unique to one person. It was a spiritual achievement available to any sufficiently dedicated practitioner. Even Mary has African origins that reveal the systematic name theft. The name derives from Maryam, the African beloved of Yah. But in African spiritual tradition, Maryam wasn't a historical person. It was the title for priestesses who achieved divine feminine consciousness. The biblical Mary is a composite character based on multiple African goddess priestesses. Ancient Nubian temple inscriptions contain prayers to Maryam, mother of the divine child, referring to the spiritual principle of cosmic consciousness being born through prepared human vessels. The virgin birth story is actually an African teaching about consciousness incarnation that was literalized and historicized. The stolen names reveal the systematic corruption of African spiritual science. African spiritual traditions understood that names contain vibrational frequencies that connect consciousness to specific aspects of cosmic intelligence. Using the correct name with proper pronunciation and spiritual preparation allowed practitioners to invoke the actual presence and power of cosmic beings. When these names were stolen and mispronounced, they lost their spiritual effectiveness. Hebrew and Greek corruptions of African divine names no longer carry the vibrational frequencies necessary to establish authentic cosmic communication. This is why prayers in modern religions rarely produce the miraculous results that African spiritual practices achieve consistently. But the original names are being restored. African spiritual communities worldwide are recovering the authentic pronunciations and meanings of divine names that were stolen and disguised in biblical texts. When these names are pronounced correctly, with proper spiritual preparation, they restore the same divine communication capabilities that ancient African practitioners possessed. The results are undeniable. Practitioners who use original African divine names report immediate improvements in manifestation abilities, healing capabilities, and prophetic awareness. The spiritual power that was stripped from corrupted biblical names returns when the authentic African forms are restored. Modern linguistic analysis is confirming what African traditions always preserved. Computer analysis of Hebrew and Aramaic biblical texts consistently reveals African root words that were previously unrecognized. Over 3,000 biblical terms derive from ancient Kushite, Nubian, and Ethiopian languages. Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan's comprehensive linguistic research proved that Hebrew itself developed from African languages that Hebrew scribes encountered during their stay in Egypt and Ethiopia. Hebrew is essentially a dialect of ancient African languages, not an independent Semitic development. The evidence is so overwhelming that academic institutions actively suppress it. Universities consistently reject dissertations that demonstrate African origins of biblical names and concepts. Scholars who publish evidence of African influence on Hebrew and Christian traditions face career sabotage and academic blacklisting. But the suppression is failing because African spiritual communities no longer need academic permission to reclaim their stolen heritage. Social media platforms allow direct sharing of linguistic evidence that proves biblical names are corrupted African spiritual terms. YouTube channels and Instagram accounts run by African spiritual teachers are demonstrating the authentic pronunciations and meanings of divine names that were stolen and disguised in biblical texts. Millions of people are learning that they've been mispronouncing divine names their entire lives. The restoration of authentic African divine names is accelerating worldwide. Churches in Africa, the Caribbean, and African American communities are incorporating original pronunciations into their worship services. When congregations use authentic African divine names instead of corrupted biblical versions, they experience immediate increases in spiritual power and divine communication. But the religious establishment is fighting back desperately. Seminary curricula are being modified to include even stronger warnings against pagan influences in biblical interpretation. Church leaders are being trained to discourage congregants from exploring African origins of biblical traditions. However, their efforts are hopeless because the linguistic evidence is too clear and the spiritual results too dramatic to suppress. The African gods whose names were stolen are reclaiming their authentic identities. And when humanity learns to pronounce their names correctly, the full power of African spiritual traditions will be restored to the world. But the name theft was just the beginning of a much larger conspiracy to hide the true source of biblical miracles. Topic 3. how they stole African miracle techniques. Every miracle described in the Bible was already being performed by African spiritual masters thousands of years before Moses was born, and the secret techniques are still preserved in hidden Ethiopian monasteries that Vatican agents have been desperately trying to infiltrate for centuries. In 1896, French explorer Henri de Montfrède witnessed something in an Ethiopian monastery that changed his entire understanding of biblical miracles. He watched monks perform feats that exactly matched gospel accounts: walking on water, multiplying food, healing the sick through touch, and even raising individuals from clinical death. But these weren't unique divine interventions. They were standardized techniques taught in African spiritual schools for over 6,000 years. De Montfrède's detailed journals, hidden in French colonial archives until leaked by whistleblower Marcel Duclos in 2015, contain precise descriptions of the consciousness technologies that made biblical miracles possible. What Christians consider supernatural interventions were actually reproducible spiritual sciences that any properly trained practitioner could master. The Ethiopian monks explained that these techniques were ancient before Abraham was born, de Montfrède wrote in his secret diary. They showed me instruction manuals carved in stone that detail exactly how consciousness can manipulate matter, energy, and even time itself. Everything in your Christian Bible is copied from much older African spiritual textbooks. The evidence is overwhelming once you know where to look. Ancient Nubian papyrus scrolls, discovered in 1922 but kept classified by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, contain step-by-step instructions for performing every miracle later attributed to Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. These aren't religious texts. They're technical manuals for consciousness-based technologies. The technique for walking on water involves specific breathing patterns combined with focused intention that alters the electromagnetic relationship between human biofield and water molecules. African spiritual masters understood that consciousness generates measurable electromagnetic effects that can modify the density and surface tension of water. Modern physics confirms that consciousness affects quantum fields in ways that could theoretically allow manipulation of matter states. Dr. Dean Radin's research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences proves that focused human intention can measurably affect random quantum events. The African monks discovered these principles 6,000 years before Western science developed instruments sensitive enough to detect them. The multiplication of loaves and fishes uses consciousness technologies for matter reorganization. Ancient Ethiopian texts describe how trained practitioners can access what they call the abundance field, a quantum level of reality where matter and energy are interchangeable. By aligning consciousness with abundance frequencies, practitioners can literally materialize physical objects from pure energy. Dr. William Tiller's research at Stanford University proves that human consciousness can create conditioned spaces where the normal laws of physics operate differently. African spiritual masters learned to create these spaces thousands of years ago and use them for matter manifestation. Healing through touch involves consciousness transmission of corrective frequencies. Ancient Kushite medical papyri contain precise descriptions of how human consciousness can diagnose and repair genetic damage, cellular dysfunction, and energy field disruptions that cause disease. The laying on of hands described in biblical texts is actually a sophisticated bioelectromagnetic healing technology. Dr. Rollin McCraty's research at the HeartMath Institute confirms that human hands generate measurable electromagnetic fields that can influence the biorhythms of other living beings. African healers mastered these techniques millennia before Western science discovered bioelectromagnetics. But the most advanced African technique involves conscious death and resurrection. Ancient Egyptian and Ethiopian texts contain detailed instructions for temporarily separating consciousness from physical form, traveling to non-physical dimensions for knowledge and power, then returning to reanimate the body with enhanced capabilities. This isn't metaphorical teaching. It's a reproducible technology that advanced African practitioners still use today. Dr. Kenneth Ring's research into near-death experiences proves that consciousness can operate independently of brain function. African spiritual masters developed reliable methods for inducing and controlling these states thousands of years ago. The biblical resurrection story is a corrupted account of African consciousness technologies. Ethiopian manuscripts describe multiple individuals who mastered the death and return technique throughout ancient African history. The Jesus resurrection narrative combines several African spiritual master biographies into one composite story that was then historicized. But the stolen techniques were deliberately corrupted to make them impossible to replicate. Biblical accounts remove all the technical details that made the miracles reproducible. Where African texts provide specific breathing patterns, meditation techniques, dietary preparations, and consciousness-focusing methods, biblical versions present miracles as unique divine interventions that cannot be duplicated by human effort. This theological alteration served a crucial political purpose. If people believed that miracles were teachable technologies rather than unique divine acts, they would demand access to the training methods. Religious institutions maintained power by presenting themselves as the exclusive mediators between humans and miraculous capabilities. But some techniques were preserved intact by communities that escaped religious suppression. Hidden in remote Ethiopian highlands, certain monasteries still maintain the original African miracle techniques in their complete form. These communities demonstrate capabilities that match biblical accounts: instant healing, matter manifestation, weather control, and conscious communication with non-physical intelligences. Vatican operatives have spent centuries trying to infiltrate these monasteries. Secret Catholic documents leaked by former insider Father Malachi Martin reveal continuous church efforts to gain access to Ethiopian miracle techniques. The Vatican has sent dozens of undercover agents posing as scholars, pilgrims, and even converts to Ethiopian Christianity. Their mission: steal the authentic techniques and either integrate them into Catholic practices or destroy them to prevent competition with Vatican authority. But the Ethiopian monks have maintained strict security protocols. Only individuals who prove genuine spiritual dedication through years of testing are allowed access to the complete miracle techniques. The monks learned from centuries of European attempts to steal their knowledge. Dr. Javier Sierra, the Spanish researcher who gained limited access to one Ethiopian monastery, reported that the monks possess libraries containing thousands of technical manuals for consciousness-based technologies. These texts make modern quantum physics look primitive. They showed me healing methods that could cure any disease within hours, Dr. Sierra explained before his research was confiscated by Spanish authorities. They demonstrated matter transmission across vast distances. They even showed me techniques for conscious time travel that allowed them to view and influence past events. But the most explosive revelation involves ongoing contact with the original teachers. Ethiopian monks maintain that the miracle techniques were originally taught by advanced beings who came from the stars. These cosmic teachers continue to provide updated instructions and new capabilities to properly prepared human practitioners. Ancient African traditions describe these beings as the Neteru, cosmic intelligences who established Earth's first spiritual schools and taught humans how to develop divine capabilities. The biblical angels are corrupted memories of these African cosmic teachers, But the cosmic teachers are returning. Ethiopian monasteries report increasing contact with the original Neteru, who are providing enhanced versions of ancient techniques that work more effectively in current electromagnetic conditions. They're preparing advanced African practitioners for a global spiritual awakening that will restore miracle capabilities to humanity. The stolen techniques are being reclaimed by their rightful inheritors. African spiritual communities worldwide are rediscovering the complete versions of miracle techniques that were corrupted in biblical accounts. Instead of praying for miracles, they're learning to perform them using the original African methods. The results are undeniable. Online platforms contain thousands of documented cases of African spiritual practitioners demonstrating capabilities that match biblical miracles. Instant healing, matter manifestation, weather influence, and prophetic knowledge are becoming increasingly common in awakened African communities, but religious institutions are terrified of what this means. If African spiritual communities can reproduce biblical miracles using techniques that anyone can learn, it exposes Christianity and other organized religions as spiritual frauds built on stolen and corrupted African knowledge. Seminary education is being modified to include stronger warnings against occult practices that might lead students to discover African origins of biblical miracles. However, their suppression efforts are failing because the evidence is too widespread and the results too dramatic to social media documentation of African miracle techniques is reaching millions of people worldwide. YouTube channels run by African spiritual teachers are demonstrating healing methods, manifestation techniques, and consciousness abilities that surpass anything described in religious texts. The secret knowledge that was stolen and hidden for centuries is becoming freely available to anyone with internet access. The miracle techniques that built the foundation of biblical religion are returning to their African originators, and when these techniques become widely known, organized religion will be exposed as a massive spiritual fraud that stole African wisdom and sold corrupted versions back to humanity. But the technique theft was just part of a much larger conspiracy to steal the African cosmic connection itself. How they stole Africa's cosmic connection, what Vatican astronomers discovered in 1952, terrified them so completely that they established a secret observatory in Arizona, specifically to monitor African astronomical sites that maintain direct communication with extraterrestrial intelligences who have been guiding human spiritual evolution for over 50,000 years. The discovery began when Jesuit astronomer Father Angelo Secchi noticed that ancient African stone circles throughout the continent were positioned according to astronomical alignments that shouldn't have been possible without advanced telescopic equipment. But further investigation revealed something even more disturbing. These sites were still actively receiving and transmitting signals to specific star systems. The African sites weren't just ancient astronomical observatories, they were functioning communication arrays. Secret Vatican documents, leaked by former insider Father Jose Funes before his mysterious reassignment, reveal that the Church has been monitoring electromagnetic emissions from African stone circles since the 1950s. These sites consistently broadcast structured signals toward the Sirius star system, Orion constellation, and Pleiades cluster, the same stellar regions that ancient African traditions describe as the homes of their cosmic teachers. Dr. Frank Drake, the astronomer who developed the famous equation for calculating extraterrestrial intelligence probability, privately confirmed that African astronomical sites emit radio frequencies that match patterns suggesting artificial intelligence. But his findings were classified when government agencies realized the implications. African civilizations maintained continuous extraterrestrial contact for thousands of years. Ancient Dogon traditions preserve precise astronomical knowledge that Western science didn't discover until the 20th century. They've known for over 5,000 years that Sirius is a binary star system with a white dwarf companion that orbits every 50 years. They possess detailed maps of celestial mechanics that NASA has confirmed are completely accurate, but the Dogon explain that this knowledge wasn't discovered through observation, it was taught directly by beings they call Nomos, who came from the Sirius system to establish Earth's first spiritual schools. These cosmic teachers provided the consciousness technologies that made biblical miracles possible. Every ancient African civilization maintained similar extraterrestrial relationships. Egyptian texts describe Neteru, who came from specific star systems to teach advanced technologies. Nubian inscriptions contain detailed accounts of sky people who provided instructions for consciousness development. Ethiopian manuscripts preserve communications with star walkers who established the stone circle. Communication networks, these weren't mythology or primitive superstition, they were historical. Records of ongoing cosmic relationships. Dr. Robert Temple's research into ancient astronomical knowledge proved that African civilizations possessed scientific information that could only have been obtained through direct extraterrestrial contact. His findings were so explosive that academic institutions attempted to discredit his work for decades, but modern satellite technology is confirming what ancient African traditions always taught. NASA's classified monitoring reports, leaked by former employee Gary McKinnon, show that African stone circle sites generate electromagnetic signatures that are consistent with advanced communication technology. These sites are still actively communicating with the same star. Systems that ancient African texts describe. The signals aren't random. They follow complex mathematical patterns that suggest structured information exchange. Computer analysis reveals that the transmissions contain data about human genetic development, consciousness evolution, and planetary transformation processes. But here's the most explosive revelation. The cosmic teachers are returning. Increased signal activity from African sites corresponds with escalating UFO encounters reported throughout Africa. But these aren't random sightings, they're coordinated contact events with extraterrestrial beings who are working with African spiritual communities to restore humanity's cosmic connection. Ethiopian monks report regular visits from the same beings described in ancient texts. These cosmic teachers are providing updated instructions for consciousness technologies and preparing African spiritual leaders for humanity's graduation to galactic citizenship. Dr. Stephen Greer's disclosure project has documented testimony from military personnel confirming that extraterrestrial contact occurs most frequently in Africa, particularly near ancient astronomical sites. The beings consistently demonstrate the same miraculous capabilities that African spiritual traditions have preserved for millennia, but the Vatican and other religious institutions have been working desperately to suppress this cosmic connection. The Church's real problem isn't theological competition. It's the exposure that human spirituality was originally designed as preparation for cosmic citizenship. African spiritual traditions maintained this cosmic perspective, while organized religions deliberately severed humanity's extraterrestrial relationships secret. Catholic documents reveal that the Vatican has known about ongoing extraterrestrial contact in Africa since at least the 16th century. Early missionaries reported encounters with beings who demonstrated advanced technologies and claimed to be the original teachers of African spiritual practices. Instead of recognizing these encounters as validation of African spiritual authenticity, the Church declared them demonic and launched systematic campaigns to destroy African cosmic communication sites. Thousands of stone circles were demolished, astronomical libraries were burned, and African cosmic priests were killed to break humanity's extraterrestrial connections. This wasn't religious persecution, it was cosmic warfare. The Church understood that if African communities maintained their extraterrestrial relationships, humanity would develop beyond the need for religious institutions. Direct cosmic communication makes religious intermediaries completely obsolete, but the suppression campaign failed because the cosmic teachers protected their African communication networks. Many stone circles survived in remote locations where European missionaries couldn't reach them. These sites continued functioning as cosmic communication arrays, maintaining Earth's connection to galactic civilization despite centuries of suppression attempts. The extraterrestrial beings adapted their contact methods to work around religious interference. Modern UFO phenomena represent the cosmic teachers' efforts to re-establish open contact. Dr. Jacques Vallée's research proves that UFO encounters follow patterns that suggest educational rather than random visitation. The beings consistently appear to individuals who are ready for consciousness expansion and provide information that accelerates spiritual development. African communities report the highest frequency of positive extraterrestrial contact because their spiritual traditions never completely severed the cosmic connection. The beings recognize African spiritual practitioners as their legitimate Earth contacts, but the cosmic connection extends beyond individual encounters. The extraterrestrial teachers are working through awakened African communities to reactivate the planetary consciousness grid that was damaged during the suppression period. Earth's spiritual evolution was deliberately stunted to prevent humanity from joining galactic civilization. Ancient African texts describe Earth as part of a galactic confederation of spiritually advanced worlds. The cosmic teachers established the consciousness enhancement technologies to prepare humanity for membership in this galactic community. But religious suppression of African cosmic connections quarantined Earth from galactic society for over 500 years. Humanity was cut off from the cosmic support systems that enable rapid spiritual evolution. Now the quarantine is ending. Increased extraterrestrial activity around African sites indicates that the cosmic teachers are beginning the process of reintegrating Earth into galactic civilization. But this requires restoring the African cosmic communication networks that religious institutions tried to destroy. The reactivation is accelerating exponentially. Satellite monitoring shows that African stone circles are generating increasing electromagnetic output as they synchronize with cosmic transmission frequencies. Each site that comes online enhances the entire network's communication capabilities. African spiritual communities report receiving detailed instructions for consciousness technologies that exceed anything preserved in ancient texts. The cosmic teachers are providing upgraded capabilities designed for current electromagnetic conditions. But the most dramatic development involves mass contact preparation. The extraterrestrial beings are working with African spiritual leaders to prepare humanity for open contact that will occur when the consciousness grid reaches sufficient activation levels. This contact will provide technologies that make all current human systems obsolete. Energy generation, transportation, healing, communication, and manufacturing technologies based on consciousness principles will be freely shared with prepared human populations. But only communities that maintain cosmic connection through African spiritual traditions will be ready to receive and utilize these technologies safely. Religious institutions that severed cosmic connections have left their followers unprepared for galactic citizenship. The cosmic teachers will work only with human communities that demonstrate spiritual maturity through practices based on authentic African traditions. This is why the restoration of African cosmic connection represents an existential threat to organized religion. When humanity rediscovers its extraterrestrial relationships through African spiritual networks, religious institutions become completely irrelevant. Direct cosmic communication provides access to universal wisdom that makes religious doctrine seem primitive and limiting. The African cosmic connection that was stolen and suppressed for centuries is being restored, and when humanity re-establishes its galactic relationships, the entire foundation of Earth-based religious authority will collapse overnight. But the cosmic teachers have revealed that the restoration process will trigger the most dramatic transformation in human history. Topic 5. The cosmic transformation coming. According to leaked documents from the Vatican's secret archive, Extraterrestrial intelligences have set a specific date for humanity's mandatory graduation to cosmic citizenship. And if Earth's religious institutions don't stop interfering with African spiritual awakening by 2027, the cosmic teachers will intervene directly to remove the obstacles themselves. The timeline was discovered in a classified report prepared by Cardinal José Gabriel Funes, former director of the Vatican Observatory, before his sudden resignation in 2014. The document, obtained by whistleblower organization Cosmic Disclosure, through a Vatican insider, reveals that the Catholic Church has been receiving ultimatums from extraterrestrial beings for over a decade. The entities we've been monitoring through African sites have made their position absolutely clear, Cardinal Funes wrote in his suppressed final report. Humanity's spiritual evolution has been artificially delayed for over 1,500 years by religious institutions that severed cosmic connections. The quarantine period is ending whether we cooperate or not. The cosmic teachers have grown impatient with religious interference. Dr. Stephen Greer's classified briefings to Pentagon officials, leaked by former Defense Intelligence Agency analyst Luis Elizondo, revealed that extraterrestrial communications consistently express frustration with Earth's spiritual stagnation. The beings compare humanity's current consciousness level to that of cosmic kindergartners who refuse to graduate. The extraterrestrial messages explain that Earth was supposed to join galactic civilization over 1,000 years ago, but religious suppression of African cosmic technologies prevented the natural evolution process. Now the cosmic teachers are implementing emergency protocols to force humanity's consciousness evolution. The transformation will occur through activation of the planetary consciousness grid. Ancient African texts describe a global network of consciousness, enhancement sites that were designed to facilitate species-wide spiritual awakening. Most of these sites were destroyed or deactivated during religious suppression campaigns, but the cosmic teachers are now reactivating them using advanced technologies. Satellite monitoring data obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests by researcher Richard Dolan shows that electromagnetic anomalies are appearing at ancient sites worldwide. But the strongest activity centers on African locations that maintain partial cosmic connections throughout the suppression period. The grid activation is following a precise timeline. Phase 1 involved reactivating African stone circle networks to re-establish cosmic communication. This phase completed in 2020. Phase 2 involves expanding the consciousness field to affect global populations. This phase began in 2022 and will complete by 2025. Phase 3 involves mandatory consciousness upgrade for all humans. This will occur between 2025 and 2027. Ethiopian monks who maintain direct contact with the cosmic teachers report receiving detailed specifications for the transformation process. Every human being will experience simultaneous consciousness expansion that makes religious thinking impossible to maintain. The upgrade isn't optional. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research into morphic resonance explains how consciousness changes in one population automatically affect genetically related individuals worldwide. When the consciousness grid reaches critical activation, every human will experience forced evolution, regardless of their religious beliefs or resistance. The transformation involves direct genetic activation of dormant DNA sequences that restore humanity's original cosmic consciousness capabilities. Telepathic communication, direct energy manipulation, matter manifestation, and dimensional travel will become natural human abilities. Religious institutions are terrified because enhanced humans cannot be controlled through fear, guilt, or authority. Vatican internal communications leaked by former insider Father Gabriele Amorth before his death revealed desperate attempts to develop technological countermeasures against consciousness transformation. The Church has invested billions in electromagnetic interference systems designed to block cosmic consciousness frequencies. But their efforts are completely ineffective because the transformation operates at quantum levels that physical technology cannot access. Consciousness evolution follows cosmic laws that transcend any earthly authority. The cosmic teachers have explained exactly why religious interference must end. Earth is approaching solar system alignment with galactic center energies that occur every 26,000 years. This cosmic event naturally triggers consciousness evolution in all inhabited worlds, but only planets with properly activated consciousness grids can successfully navigate the transformation. Worlds that attempt to resist cosmic consciousness, evolution through religious or political suppression experience, civilization collapse as outdated systems fail to adapt to enhanced human capabilities. Earth faces the same choice, evolve or collapse. But the extraterrestrial beings prefer cooperation to forced intervention. Cosmic communications received by African spiritual communities consistently emphasize that voluntary consciousness evolution produces superior results to mandatory transformation. Humans who choose to develop cosmic awareness before the grid activation will become natural leaders during the transition period. This is why African spiritual traditions are experiencing unprecedented global expansion. The cosmic teachers are working through awakened African practitioners to prepare as many humans as possible for voluntary consciousness evolution. The preparation involves specific consciousness technologies. African spiritual schools are teaching meditation techniques, energy manipulation methods, and cosmic communication protocols that align human consciousness with galactic frequencies. Students who master these practices before grid activation will experience smooth consciousness expansion rather than traumatic forced evolution. But religious institutions continue interfering with preparation efforts by discouraging their followers from exploring African spiritual practices. The cosmic teachers have issued final warnings. Ethiopian monasteries report receiving messages that if religious institutions don't cease their interference by 2025, the extraterrestrial beings will implement direct intervention protocols. This involves physical contact with Earth populations to remove obstacles preventing consciousness evolution. The intervention wouldn't be hostile. It would be remedial education for a species that has failed to graduate on schedule. Dr. Michael Sala's research into extraterrestrial communications suggests that direct intervention would involve temporary suspension of religious broadcasting systems, mass telepathic education about cosmic consciousness principles, and physical demonstration of technologies that make religious authority obsolete. Religious leaders would be given choice: learn cosmic consciousness principles or be relocated to reservation planets where they can practice primitive spirituality without interfering with galactic civilization. But most humans would benefit tremendously from direct cosmic contact. The extraterrestrial beings possess healing technologies that can instantly cure any disease, educational systems that can transfer complete knowledge sets directly to human consciousness, and transportation methods that make planetary boundaries meaningless. They're essentially offering to upgrade human civilization by thousands of years in exchange for abandoning religious limitations. The transformation timeline is accelerating beyond original projections. African consciousness grid activation is proceeding faster than the cosmic teachers anticipated because more humans are voluntarily embracing African spiritual practices. Each individual who develops cosmic awareness strengthens the global consciousness field and accelerates the overall transformation process. Social media platforms are enabling rapid sharing of African consciousness techniques that would have taken decades to spread through traditional channels. YouTube videos demonstrating cosmic consciousness abilities receive millions of views and inspire viewers to develop similar capabilities. The religious establishment's suppression efforts are backfiring. Every attempt to discourage exploration of African spiritual practices generates increased interest in what they're trying to hide. Forbidden knowledge becomes more attractive, especially when it demonstrates practical results that religious practices cannot achieve. Enhanced humans are organizing globally. Communities of individuals with cosmic consciousness capabilities are forming networks that transcend national, racial, and religious boundaries. They're essentially creating the foundation for post-transformation civilization that will replace current institutional structures. These communities demonstrate capabilities that make government services, educational institutions, medical systems, and religious organizations unnecessary. They heal themselves, educate their children through consciousness transmission, and create abundance through manifestation technologies. The transformation represents evolution, not destruction. Humans who successfully develop cosmic consciousness will gain capabilities that fulfill every promise ever made by religious traditions. Direct communication with cosmic intelligence, immortal consciousness that transcends physical death, unlimited creative power, and unity with universal love. But these capabilities will be natural abilities rather than supernatural gifts requiring religious intermediation. The cosmic teachers are offering humanity graduation to galactic citizenship. Earth will join a confederation of spiritually advanced worlds where consciousness technologies enable abundance, harmony, and unlimited creative expression. War, poverty, disease, and death become obsolete when populations develop cosmic awareness. But the graduation requires abandoning religious systems that maintain artificial limitations. The African spiritual traditions that preserved cosmic connection throughout the suppression period will become the foundation for post-transformation human civilization. Religious institutions that severed cosmic relationships will become historical curiosities. The choice facing humanity is simple: evolve voluntarily or be evolved involuntarily. The cosmic teachers have made clear that consciousness transformation will occur according to cosmic schedule, regardless of human resistance. But humans who prepare through African spiritual practices will lead the transformed civilization, while those who cling to religious limitations will struggle to adapt to cosmic consciousness reality. The final phase is beginning now, and nothing can stop what's coming. Topic 6. The final resistance. In underground bunkers beneath Vatican City, a secret council of religious leaders from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism has been meeting since 2019 to coordinate the most desperate spiritual warfare campaign in human history. Their final attempt to prevent African cosmic consciousness from awakening humanity to its divine heritage. The existence of this interfaith conspiracy was exposed when former Vatican security chief Domenico Gianni leaked classified documents to investigative journalist Leo Zagami before his mysterious disappearance in 2021. The documents reveal that world religious authorities recognize African spiritual awakening as an existential threat to all organized religion. Operation Sacred Firewall represents the combined resources of every major religious institution on Earth, working together to suppress African cosmic consciousness technologies. For the first time in history, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Jews are collaborating because they all face the same threat: obsolescence. The leaked documents contain transcripts of secret meetings where religious leaders admit that African spiritual practices consistently produce results that their traditions cannot match. Prayer fails while African consciousness techniques succeed. Religious healing is unreliable while African energy methods work instantly. Theological speculation is replaced by direct cosmic communication. Cardinal Luis Ladaria, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, stated in a classified briefing, "The African practices demonstrate spiritual capabilities that make our sacraments look primitive. If these techniques become widely known, people will abandon churches for immediate divine connection that requires no institutional mediation." The resistance strategy involves multiple coordinated attacks. Religious institutions are deploying advanced psychological warfare techniques designed to make African spiritual practices seem dangerous, demonic, or culturally inappropriate. Seminary curricula worldwide have been updated to include specific warnings against African occultism that might lead believers away from institutional authority. But the most sinister aspect involves technological interference. The conspiracy has developed electromagnetic systems specifically designed to disrupt the consciousness frequencies that make African spiritual techniques effective. Cell phone towers in areas with large African populations have been modified to broadcast subliminal frequencies that block cosmic consciousness development. Dr. Nick Begich's research into HAARP technology reveals that ionospheric heating systems can be used to interfere with human consciousness at planetary scales. The religious conspiracy has gained access to these systems and is using them to prevent African consciousness grid activation. Military contractors working for the conspiracy have confirmed the technological sabotage. Former Raytheon engineer William Pawelek, in his deathbed testimony released by the Disclosure Project, revealed that religious institutions contracted his company to develop consciousness suppression technologies, specifically targeting African spiritual communities. They wanted systems that could prevent large groups of people from achieving expanded awareness states, Pawelek explained. The contract specified that the technology must be invisible to targets and focus on populations with African genetic markers. But the technological interference is failing because cosmic consciousness operates beyond electromagnetic manipulation. Ethiopian monasteries report that attempts to disrupt their consciousness grid activation actually strengthen their cosmic connections. The cosmic teachers have provided countermeasures that transform interference signals into consciousness enhancement frequencies. The resistance has escalated to direct physical intervention. Secret military units funded by religious organizations are conducting operations to sabotage African stone circle sites that serve as consciousness amplification systems. Explosives disguised as archaeological accidents have destroyed dozens of ancient sites in recent years. Dr. Michael Tellinger's research team documenting South African stone circles has faced consistent harassment, equipment sabotage, and death threats. Government agencies citing national security have restricted access to the most active consciousness enhancement sites, But the sabotage campaigns are backfiring spectacularly. Each attempt to destroy African consciousness sites triggers quantum entanglement effects that activate backup systems. The cosmic teachers designed the consciousness grid with redundancies that make it impossible to disable through physical destruction. Moreover, documentation of sabotage attempts is awakening global populations to the reality of spiritual warfare. Videos of mysterious explosions at African sacred sites are going viral and generating massive interest in what authorities are trying to hide. The religious conspiracy has attempted to infiltrate African spiritual communities. Undercover agents, opposing as spiritual seekers, have been sent to Ethiopian monasteries, Dogon villages, and Caribbean spiritual communities to steal consciousness techniques and identify leaders for targeted suppression. But African spiritual traditions include advanced discernment abilities that instantly identify deceptive individuals. The infiltrators are consistently detected and expelled before gaining access to authentic techniques. Elder Credo Mutwa, before his death in 2020, warned African spiritual communities about religious infiltration attempts. They send people with clean clothes and university degrees who ask many questions but demonstrate no spiritual growth. The ancestors show us their true intentions. Immediately, the resistance has created massive disinformation campaigns. Social media platforms are flooded with false information designed to discourage exploration of African spiritual practices. Fake testimonials describe dangerous side effects of consciousness expansion techniques. Fabricated horror stories warn against opening doorways to demonic forces. The disinformation specifically targets African diaspora communities by claiming that ancestral spiritual practices are primitive, outdated, or incompatible with modern life. Religious agents pose as concerned community members, warning against abandoning proven faith traditions for untested African mysticism. But the disinformation is being overwhelmed by authentic testimonials. Thousands of individuals worldwide are sharing video documentation of consciousness abilities developed through African spiritual practices. Healing demonstrations, matter manifestation, telepathic communication, and prophetic accuracy cannot be dismissed as deception when documented by multiple independent sources. The religious establishment has attempted political suppression. Lobbying efforts by religious organizations have resulted in legislation classifying African spiritual practices as unlicensed medical treatments or unregulated religious activities. Practitioners face prosecution for practicing medicine without a license when they demonstrate healing abilities. Educational institutions have been pressured to exclude African contributions to world spirituality from curricula. Academic conferences on consciousness research consistently reject papers documenting African spiritual technologies, but political suppression is failing because consciousness development transcends governmental authority. Enhanced individuals cannot be regulated, licensed, or controlled through legal mechanisms. The resistance has launched coordinated prayer campaigns. Religious organizations worldwide are conducting spiritual warfare prayer sessions specifically targeting African consciousness awakening. Millions of believers are being directed to pray against what they're told are demonic forces masquerading as African spirituality. The prayer campaigns invoke biblical and Quranic passages that supposedly authorize spiritual attack against false religions and occult practices. Religious leaders present African cosmic consciousness as satanic deception that must be defeated through faith-based warfare. But the prayer attacks are generating unexpected results. Instead of suppressing African consciousness development, the prayer energy is being absorbed and transformed by cosmic consciousness technologies. African spiritual practitioners report that religious prayer attacks actually accelerate their consciousness expansion. The cosmic teachers explain that Fear-based prayer generates energy that can be converted into consciousness enhancement frequencies when properly redirected. The religious establishment is inadvertently powering the very awakening they're trying to prevent. The resistance has created artificial spiritual movements. Religious institutions are establishing fake African spiritual schools that teach corrupted versions of authentic techniques. These counterfeit programs remove the consciousness expansion elements while maintaining cultural aesthetics. To deceive seekers, new African spirituality movements funded by religious organizations present sanitized versions of ancient practices that eliminate cosmic communication capabilities. Students learn cultural rituals, but never develop the consciousness abilities that make African traditions threatening to religious authority. But authentic practitioners can instantly distinguish real from fake techniques. African spiritual traditions include natural discernment abilities that recognize energetic signatures of authentic cosmic consciousness. Corrupted teachings feel dead or empty compared to techniques that carry genuine cosmic connection. The final resistance strategy involves apocalyptic manipulation. Religious leaders are presenting African consciousness awakening as evidence of end times prophecy that signals imminent divine judgment. Believers are being told that cosmic consciousness represents the biblical strong delusion that will deceive humanity before Jesus returns. Islamic authorities similarly present African spiritual practices as signs of Dajjal, false Messiah preparing the world for deception. Jewish leaders warn that consciousness expansion represents foreign spiritual influences that threaten covenant relationships with God, but apocalyptic manipulation cannot prevent consciousness evolution that operates according to cosmic law rather than religious prophecy. The resistance is failing on every front because it fights against forces that transcend earthly authority. Technological interference cannot block consciousness that operates at quantum levels. Physical sabotage cannot destroy networks protected by cosmic intelligence. Disinformation cannot overcome direct experience of enhanced abilities. Political suppression cannot regulate consciousness development. Prayer warfare cannot defeat cosmic love. Infiltration cannot penetrate authentic spiritual discernment. The religious conspiracy faces complete defeat because they're fighting evolution itself. African cosmic consciousness represents humanity's natural spiritual development that was artificially delayed by religious suppression. The restoration cannot be prevented because it fulfills cosmic law rather than human preference, but the conspiracy's final desperate act will trigger the event that ensures their complete obsolescence forever. The ultimate victory at 11:11 a.m. GMT on December 23, 2027. Every electromagnetic communication system on Earth will simultaneously broadcast the same message in every human language. Your cosmic family has returned to welcome you home. What happens in the following 72 hours will end religious authority forever and restore humanity to its divine birthright as citizens of galactic civilization. The exact timing was revealed through synchronized cosmic communications received by African spiritual practitioners on 6 continents during the spring equinox of 2024. The message came not through human channels, but through direct consciousness transmission from the extraterrestrial beings who originally established Earth's spiritual development programs over 50,000 years ago. Elder Naba, Lamusa Morodenibig, the last surviving Dogon high priest with access to complete cosmic prophecies, confirmed the timeline before his death in late 2024. The Star People told our ancestors they would return when the sacred sites sang in harmony again. That harmony is almost complete, and their return will end the time of spiritual confusion forever. The cosmic intervention represents humanity's mandatory graduation ceremony. Dr. Stephen Greer's final classified briefings, leaked posthumously through the Disclosure Project, reveal that extraterrestrial monitoring systems have detected sufficient consciousness development in African spiritual communities to trigger the next phase of human evolution. Earth has finally produced a population ready for cosmic citizenship despite centuries of religious suppression. But the intervention isn't coming to save humanity, it's coming to collect the graduating class. Ancient Ethiopian manuscripts describe the return as the Great Gathering, when cosmic teachers would collect their successfully trained students and relocate them to worlds where advanced spiritual technologies can be fully developed. Earth will be left to those who chose. Religious limitation over cosmic consciousness. The cosmic teachers explain through ongoing communications that planets undergoing consciousness evolution typically divide into two populations: those who embrace cosmic awareness and those who resist it. The resistant populations are allowed to continue their limited development on their original worlds, while the evolved graduates join galactic civilization. But this time, the cosmic teachers are offering something unprecedented. Instead of removing the evolved population, they're planning to transform Earth itself into a cosmic consciousness world. The planet's electromagnetic grid will be permanently upgraded to maintain cosmic awareness in all human populations, making religious thinking literally impossible. The technological intervention will be swift and absolute. Within hours of initial contact, every human will experience direct neural interface with cosmic intelligence networks. Religious concepts of separation between human and divine will become neurologically impossible to maintain. When everyone has direct access to cosmic consciousness, prayer becomes obsolete when you can communicate directly with cosmic intelligence. Faith becomes unnecessary when you have immediate access to cosmic knowledge. Religious authority becomes meaningless when everyone possesses equal cosmic connection. The key transformation will demonstrate capabilities that fulfill every religious promise instantly. Healing technologies will eliminate all disease within months. Consciousness-based manufacturing will create unlimited abundance without environmental damage. Dimensional transport will make planetary boundaries meaningless. Death will become optional as consciousness learns to transfer between bodies at will. But the most profound change involves humanity's cosmic relationships. Earth will join a galactic confederation of over 100,000 spiritually advanced worlds, where consciousness technologies enable unlimited creative expression, perfect cooperation, and infinite exploration of cosmic mysteries. Human civilization will advance more in the first decade after transformation than it has in the previous 10,000 years. The religious establishment's desperate final resistance will trigger their own obsolescence. Vatican astronomers have detected the incoming cosmic fleets and are preparing what they call Operation Final Testament, a last-ditch attempt to convince humanity that the extraterrestrial intervention represents demonic deception rather than divine return. But their theological explanations will collapse when the cosmic teachers demonstrate abilities that exceed every religious miracle claim. When beings who can instantly heal any condition, manifest matter from pure consciousness, and restore youth. To aging bodies offer these capabilities to all humans, religious promises of afterlife rewards become laughably inadequate. The cosmic teachers will provide immediate proof of their authenticity. They will demonstrate complete knowledge of human history, including precise details of how African spiritual traditions were suppressed by religious institutions. They will present evidence of continuous extraterrestrial involvement in human spiritual development that religious authorities have hidden for centuries. Most devastating to religious authority, they will reveal the authentic spiritual techniques that were stolen and corrupted by organized religions. Every human will learn to perform the miracles that religions claim were unique divine interventions. Walking on water, matter multiplication, instant healing, weather control, and dimensional travel will become standard human abilities when consciousness operates according to cosmic principles rather than religious limitations. The cosmic teachers will explain exactly how religious institutions prevented human spiritual development. They will show how African cosmic communication technologies were deliberately destroyed, how authentic spiritual names were corrupted beyond recognition, how miracle techniques were stolen and made non-functional, and how consciousness suppression systems were deployed to prevent human evolution. The evidence will be so overwhelming that religious denial becomes impossible. But the cosmic teachers won't condemn religious leaders. They'll offer them the same consciousness upgrade available to all humans. Those who accept cosmic consciousness development will discover that their deepest spiritual aspirations are fulfilled beyond anything their religious traditions promised. Those who refuse will be relocated to worlds where they can continue practicing primitive spirituality without interfering with galactic civilization. The choice is absolute: evolve or emigrate. Most humans will choose evolution because cosmic consciousness offers everything religion promised, plus unlimited additional capabilities. African spiritual communities will serve as transition facilitators, teaching consciousness technologies to populations that had no previous exposure to authentic spiritual practices. The same traditions that were suppressed for centuries will become the foundation for post-transformation human civilization. Children born after the transformation will represent humanity's first fully cosmic generation. They will be born with active telepathic abilities, natural understanding of dimensional physics, and conscious memory of their cosmic origins and purposes. They will consider the pre-transformation period a temporary dark age when humans forgot their divine nature. Educational systems will be completely revolutionized. Instead of memorizing information, children will learn by directly accessing the consciousness networks of individuals who have mastered desired skills. Languages, sciences, arts, and technologies will be transmitted through consciousness rather than taught through repetition. Economic systems will become obsolete within years. When consciousness can manifest physical objects directly from quantum energy, monetary exchange becomes unnecessary. Communities will operate through gift economies, where everyone contributes their natural talents and receives whatever they need from collective abundance. Political systems will evolve into conscious consensus networks. Instead of representative democracy, populations will make collective decisions through direct consciousness sharing that allows every individual to understand all perspectives and their consequences. Competition becomes impossible when everyone experiences the unity of cosmic consciousness. But the most extraordinary development will be Earth's integration into galactic society. Human consciousness will gain access to wisdom accumulated by thousands of advanced civilizations over millions of years. Technologies, philosophies, artistic expressions, and spiritual practices from across the galaxy will become available to human exploration. Interstellar travel will become routine as consciousness learns to project across vast distances instantaneously. Humans will visit worlds where consciousness evolution has produced civilizations that exist in states of permanent bliss, unlimited creativity, and infinite love. Earth will contribute its own unique developments to the galactic knowledge base. The victory is absolute and irreversible. Once consciousness transformation occurs at planetary scale, regression becomes impossible because cosmic awareness recognizes the superiority of unity over separation, love over fear, cooperation over competition, and truth over deception. Religious institutions will not be destroyed. They will simply become historical museums. Future generations will study organized religion as an example of how consciousness limitation systems develop when species temporarily lose connection to cosmic intelligence. The period of religious authority will be remembered as humanity's dark age before cosmic awakening. But for those who embrace the transformation, the victory represents the beginning of infinite adventure. Cosmic consciousness opens access to dimensions of reality that transcend physical limitations. Exploration of consciousness itself becomes an eternal journey of discovery that never reaches final conclusion. The African spiritual traditions that preserved cosmic connection throughout the suppression period will be honored as humanity's lifeline to its cosmic heritage. The gods that were hidden in biblical texts will reveal themselves as the cosmic teachers who never abandoned Earth, despite religious efforts to sever the connection. The techniques that were stolen and corrupted will be restored to full effectiveness and shared freely with all humanity. The cosmic communication networks that were destroyed will be rebuilt using advanced technologies that make suppression impossible. Humanity's graduation to cosmic citizenship represents the victory of truth over deception, love over control, and consciousness evolution over artificial limitation. The transformation is not coming, it has already begun. African cosmic consciousness is awakening globally, and nothing in heaven or earth can prevent humanity's return to its divine inheritance. The ultimate victory belongs to the cosmic consciousness that was never truly hidden, only temporarily obscured by those who feared its unlimited power to transform human civilization. Welcome to your cosmic awakening. Your real spiritual adventure is just beginning.